So instead of just talking about the restart day after day after day with that cautious optimism, it does seem like we have arrived, at least as close as we can, to the light at the end of the tunnel. So what are your overall first impressions of the style of play that you've seen from the exhibition games and just the overall pace?
Well, I think the number one thing I thought of was that it's probably a bit edgier than I thought it was going to be. I thought the players were going to ease into it maybe a little bit. I thought it would be difficult to ramp up the emotion. I thought also exhibition game, hey, save it. You guys had a fight in your game the other night between the Rangers and the Islanders. I don't know if anybody was expecting that. I saw some huge hits. Jake Muzzin in the Toronto game delivered one of his patented hits. So I think the games were a little bit edgier in some cases than I expected them to be. I think the toughest thing, guys, is just the creation of emotion for the players and the media. Like the first game I worked was Montreal-Toronto, and when I saw just the guys walking out on the ice, the warm-up, I was excited to see it. I realized how much I missed it. And it really revved me up. But I found watching the games without fans was harder for me than I thought in terms of creating the excitement. But I thought the players were edgier in some cases than I was expecting them to be. And if the players are like that, we're all going to be drawn into it, especially when the games really start to matter.
Certainly some of those matchups I thought helped too. You have Washington and Carolina. Both those teams hate each other from previous experience. St. Louis, Chicago. Both New York teams. You're talking about the vibe in the arena. I want to take it outside the arena. There's always the debate every single year about which Canadian teams are going to make the playoffs. This year we have every single team making the playoffs, and the Cup is going to be in Canada for the first time in 27 years. What's the vibe in Canada in general about hockey being back in that country?
Well, so one of my good buddies from university, he moved to the United States, and we have a group chat, and he texts us and he says, it's the only way the Stanley Cup can get into Canada is you guys are hosting the tournament. So people are ripping us for that kind of thing all the time. I mean, it's I'm a kind of guy, like I've been in the business now since 1993, and I actually started after Montreal won the Cup. And I joke that just for once, I would love to cover a Canadian team winning the Stanley Cup. I said, I don't even care which one it is. I just want to see it in my lifetime, a Canadian team winning the Cup. Now, this would be the weirdest year for one of them ever to win it because we don't know if we could even have a parade or anything like that. But, I just think that I'm so excited to see sports. Mm-hmm. What's the old line? You don't really realize how much you miss something until it's taken away from you. Yeah. I'm so excited to see sports. I'm so excited to see competition. I'm excited to see the Canadian teams go for it. I just can't wait until the puck drops for real on Saturday.
We're going to talk about one of those Canadian teams in a second, but I just want to go back to what you said about the edginess you saw from the exhibition games and the lack of, you noticed that there were no fans. I'm sure players noticed it as well. Do you feel like maybe there's an overcompensation? Because guys talk about sometimes when they haven't played in a long time, they really just want to get those hits. They want to get checked. That first big hit kind of snaps them into game action. So do you think maybe that's why we were seeing that style, and maybe going forward without fans, guys are trying to pump themselves up in other ways?
I do think that's the case, Michelle. And, for Manson who played, like you remember, like your first game, like training camp and exhibition games are usually 2 weeks, right? And one thing that coaches always tell me is be very careful looking at the results of the first week of exhibition games, because the guys who really made the team, they sleepwalk through those. It's the second week that guys really start to get going, and the people who are really on the team really start to play. So normally that first exhibition game, it's not very good. And now, like a lot of these, unless you're on the top 4 teams, you're going from one exhibition game to really meaningful. So yes, Michelle, you have to get yourself going. I think the other thing too is that the NHL made it pretty clear that a lot of their bells and whistles, they weren't going to use them in the exhibition games. And they really want to come out with them on Saturday when the first games really start. So I wonder how much more we're going to see from the league and the buildings themselves in terms of what are we going to do to get these guys going, just in an emotional sense.
Well, and typically, too, to your point there, Elliotte, guys get ready for training camp and they peak and then they plateau a little bit and then they ramp it back up again. You don't have those stages now. You can't dip your toe in the water. You've got to make sure you're ready to go right from puck drop, because it's a 5-game series, not a 7-game series. So that makes that first game that much more important.
Absolutely it is. And I think also what it will do, Anson, is that coaches can't be as patient as they normally are. In the in the regular season, if your goalie has a bad game one, you're like, oh, he's our guy. We're going to give him another game to sort himself out. Or if a player is really slow in starting, you're looking at it and saying, we'll let him find his legs and have a couple more games. You can't necessarily do that. And, you know, one of the guys that I'm really looking at that in particular is Carey Price from Montreal. You know, if they're going to beat Pittsburgh, he's going to have to be unbelievable. And if you look at Price the last 2 years, his Octobers haven't been good. And it's not like you're looking at this and saying, well, you know, Carey Price will get pulled and maybe Lindgren becomes their starting goalie. But you are saying, if you're Montreal, if we're going to have any chance in this, we can't have October Carey Price from the last 2 years. We need him dialed in right away and going, or else we're really in trouble.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's switch gears to another Canadian team, the matchup between the Canucks and the Minnesota Wild. The Canucks started the season off really hot, a lot of young stars there. And then Minnesota really turned a corner in the second half of the season. You know, a little bit after January, they had a coaching change, kind of shook things up a bit there. Who do you think benefits the most from the pause?
I would say Vancouver probably does, you know, just because, you know, I take a look at Minnesota and they were really going. And one thing I do think, Michelle, is that you look at teams like Philadelphia, you look at teams like Vegas, you look at teams like Minnesota. Those are probably the teams sitting there saying, boy, like this comes at the worst time for us because we were really charging. I think the Rangers are another example of that. They were really charging. And all of a sudden, now how do you recapture that momentum? I think the thing about Vancouver, too, is one of their best players is Quinn Hughes. And they felt he was having a dynamite year, but he was starting first year as a pro coming out of Michigan. I know you hate to hear the words Michigan, Anson. Sorry about that. But the first year pro coming out of Michigan, you're not used to that schedule. And I think they were worried he was getting a little bit tired, and they loved the way he looked rested to play. So I think if you take a look at Hughes, being refreshed and going, I think he's a guy who is so important to Vancouver, and I think that really helps them a lot. I didn't like them in their exhibition game last night, Michelle. I didn't think they were that sharp, but you know, when Antoine Roussel comes out and says we've got the best goalie and we've got the best player and we've got the better team, now Vancouver's got a reason they better back it up.
And also they got that veteran presence there too. There's a reason why they brought Toffoli in. They brought Jay Beagle. A couple guys have had Stanley Cups under their belt. Little sandpaper with Ferland and JT Miller. So, yeah, to your point, I think Hughes will be a big factor, and Pettersson too. But the veteran leadership in that room is going to be huge for a young hockey club for Travis Green.
Well, absolutely is going to be. And they're deep. Like they've got, you know, I know Louis Eriksson hasn't really worked out there and Jake Virtanen's had a tough year. But when those are the guys that aren't dressing for you, it's not the worst thing. Like those are two NHL players that didn't play in your exhibition game. And that says to me that you're deep. And like I said, you know, I think in this tournament where, you know, guys are going to get hurt, the ice is going to be used 3 or 4 times a day, you're going to get guys with those nagging leg and groin and abdominal injuries. So you better be deep.
Real quick before we let you go, we saw what Columbus did to Tampa Bay last season. Toronto, similar style of play. What are your expectations for that series?
Well, Michelle, I'm from Toronto. I grew up in Toronto. I lived most of my life in Toronto, and some of my best friends are Leaf fans, and they are in full-out panic about this kind of series. Like, they're talking to me like they're going to push us around, and hopefully Nick Robertson can be the savior. I'm like, he's 19. He's never played an NHL game. Give me a break, guys. So there's some meltdown mode going on here in Toronto. There's no question. To me, this is the most fascinating first-round series because of the difference. There's Toronto, you're extremely skilled team that they can put an 8 up on you if you're not careful. And then you've got Columbus, and they grind you, and they forecheck you, and they score in unconventional ways, and they play hard, and they take no easy shifts. And their coach is already refusing to talk to the media during scrimmages and talking about how lousy last week of practicing is. Like, you know, Tortorella is going to have them riled up to play. It's going to be a great series.
Yeah, absolutely. Elliotte, thank you so much for joining us. We
Thanks,
look forward
Elliotte.
to see what happens with that beard, and we look forward to all of your coverage throughout the playoffs.
Michelle Edson, thanks very much for having me, guys. I'm looking forward to it. It's great to have it back.